I'm excited to bring up Jim, who I forgot, and his partner ML. They have a story about a uniquely Detroit scandal. Take it away, gentlemen.
Hey kids, my name is ML Elrick, and I'm here to tell you a story. I'm going to take you back to the magical year of 2002 when texts were mysterious messages that were sent through exotic little devices. That's when a man who loved to bury the truth ran into two men who loved to dig out the truth. The first man's name is Kwame Kilpatrick, and he just became the mayor of Detroit. At first, I thought he would be the best mayor of my lifetime, and I almost gave up journalism to take a job with him. But I stayed at the newspaper and became fascinated watching him constantly fiddling with this little device. No matter where he went, he seemed to be playing a handheld video game. When his aides told me it was a BlackBerry and he was texting, I just had to know what they were talking about. So I filed a Freedom of Information request to see what he was writing that was so important. The city said they didn't have the messages. And remember, I still thought this guy was pretty cool. So I went on to other things. But before too long, my bosses found out that I'd looked into a rumor that there was a wild party at the mayor's mayoral mansion. I didn't believe it, but they thought it might be true. So they decided to get me digging some more. And then they brought in a big gun.
Thanks, Mike. So I got paired up with Mike, and we went chasing after this rumor about a nude wild party at the Manoogian Mansion. We spent 3 weeks on it. We weren't able to prove it. To this day, that party hasn't been proven. But when you work on something for 3 weeks, editors look at you and say, well, what do you have? And so we said, well, we noticed the mayor has a lot of bodyguards, and they're all police officers, and they work full time for him. And in Detroit at the time, still to a certain degree today, if you called 911, they'd take a while to show up. Sometimes they don't show up, or they show up the next day. So having cops dedicated to watching the mayor was a big deal. So we wrote a story. The headline was "Watching Kilpatrick is a full-time job for 20 cops. Other major cities assign fewer." After that story broke, we started getting flooded with tips. And over the next few years, we wrote other headlines. Kilpatrick expenses exposed. Top Kilpatrick police bodyguard took star to illegal club. Police kept watch as Queen Latifah partied. Kilpatrick stocks city payroll with friends and family. And then mayor too wild for DC cops. During this time, we also tried to get the text messages again. There was a lawsuit that was filed, and the plaintiff's attorney in that case thought he might be able to subpoena the mayor's text messages. We thought that would be pretty cool, so we stayed on top of that. But in the end, the city sent a lawyer to this company that had the text messages and threatened them. If you release these things, there's going to be big problems. So we didn't get the texts. And the stories we'd done up to that point, well, we thought they'd had very little impact, frankly, even though we thought they were great journalism. The mayor and his family called them misinformation and said we were on a witch hunt. We were fake news before fake news.
But the mayor thought the stories had some impact because when he announced his reelection campaign, it was with a radio commercial in which he began with an apology. No one had ever done that before in Detroit, and we had pretty much counted him out. But at the very last minute, he pulled off a miracle and he was reelected. Now, my bosses thought the mayor had learned from his brush with death, and they wanted to assign me to do something else. Well, I wanted to stay on this story, so I had to quit the paper to go literally across the street to a TV station who said they cared about the mayor more than anything else. So I thought I was home free. Well, the mayor didn't agree, and within 4 months, he had sent a team over to the TV station, and there had been an agreement made that I would not cover the mayor anymore. Now, nobody had the good manners to tell me that, so I kind of just went the next 18 months getting stories killed and wondering if I knew what the hell I was doing, if I was any good at this business. And eventually I went back to the Free Press, but I was not the same guy who left. I went back with a broken heart and no confidence.
I was off doing other things at that time too, not covering the mayor. I was covering criminal justice issues. But there was a trial coming up. That lawsuit that I mentioned was finally going to be heard in court. This was a case where 2 police officers had sued the mayor, saying that he had ruined their careers because they were getting involved in investigations that might expose that Kwame Kilpatrick was cheating on his wife and indeed philandering with lots of different women. So I grabbed Mike and we planned to cover this trial coming up. We also learned that we might actually see the text messages during this trial because this attorney was persistent and convinced the judge over the years that they were relevant to the trial. And so the judge said, okay, go ahead and subpoena them, but they're coming directly to me. And I will keep them secret. And if I see anything that contradicts what is testified to in this trial, you can use them to basically contradict the witnesses. So Kwame Kilpatrick takes the stand. One of the biggest questions he's asked by the plaintiff's attorney is, did you and your chief of staff, a woman named Christine Beatty, have a romantic relationship? He was indignant, flat out denied it. His testimony was a lecture about how even the very question is unfair and insulting to successful women who succeed every year and every day. We thought it was a masterful performance and very convincing for the jury.
So by now, this guy who I really liked, I mean, there was a time I was praying for his success. I'm now praying that we finally get some justice in this town. And the lawyer for the whistleblowers turns to the judge and says, Your Honor, what'd you think? The judge is kind of confused. And so the lawyer says, remember, you're going to look at those text messages. And if you heard a lie in the witness stand, you're going to let them all come out. And the judge just says, what texts? So the whistleblower's lawyer was pretty confident that he had made his case, and he begins his closing arguments. Turns out the jury did not buy the mayor's bravura performance on the witness stand like the rest of us did. They just thought it was another politician saying pretty words, and they slammed him. But Jim and I were not happy. We felt like hope had died. It seemed like these text messages we've been trying for 5 or 6 years to get were going to be gone forever.
And then one night I got a phone call. And then I was called to a meeting in a restaurant. I didn't tell anybody about it because I wasn't sure what was going to happen. It was very mysterious. And at this meeting, I'm sitting at a table and the text messages are slid across the table to me. They were printed out on stacks of paper about that high. And my reaction after looking at them, frankly, was holy shit. I couldn't believe it. Here they were after all these years of trying to get them, and they were right in front of me. So I called Mike and our editor, dashed back to the newsroom, and pulled them into, they had no idea that I had done this, pulled them into a meeting room. And I said, gentlemen, I think we just hit the mud load.
So I'm in the pit of despair, and Jim throws this lifeline down there. So I have to go out to one of our suburban offices. He's sitting on the top floor of this sterile insurance building. I'm going up the elevator. When what does he got? What does he got? I get in the office, and it's Jim, a desk, and a stack of papers. And I'm like, what's in them? Is this good? He's like, take a look. And I said, just, tease me a little bit. Give me a little taste. He says, take a look. So I do. Top page is a reference to love. And I'm like, okay, but these are high school friends, the mayor and his chief of staff. So they could love each other, in the way I love Jim as a colleague. Second page, pretty boring. Third page, I see something where I think that's a little salty. And by the time we get through this stack of messages, we have found messages that say things like, I've been dreaming all day about having you to myself for 3 days, relaxing, laughing, talking, sleeping, and making love. Bingo. But my exhilaration was pretty short-lived because I still wasn't confident that my bosses would publish the story. And if they wouldn't, I'd have to quit. And by now I'm running out of places to work in Detroit. But there was still this tingle. And I turned to Jim and I said, this could be our Pulitzer here.
Which I did not want to hear.
No, he didn't want to.
Because I'm superstitious and I didn't want to jinx anything, but I also didn't want people to think that's why we were doing this story. It wasn't about winning an award. That's nice, but that wasn't why we did it. So we get called to a meeting with our bosses. And as far as we knew, they didn't know about this yet. So we're like, uh-oh, what's coming here? Are we in trouble? Because we had pushed some things. We had made a deal with a source without running it up the chain. They were the last ones to know that what we had here, and that's a pretty big no-no. So we go up to the upper floors of the Detroit Free Press to the editor's office, and he's in there. The managing editor is there, the deputy managing editor, and then our editor, and then me and Mike. And we sit down on some couches, and the managing editor kind of leans in, and he says, what you guys just did, don't ever do that again. And then he goes, but this is a hell of a story.
And it was a hell of a story. And it took us a couple months to get it ready to publish. And, we still didn't know when we published it, were people going to care? We'd done so many stories that hadn't taken the mayor out, not because we want him to be out, but because he'd broken the law. But it's publication night. We're buttoning things up. I live in the city of Detroit. The mayor's still powerful. He runs the police department. So I send my family away, just in case. Jim and I are very confident we've got the goods, but we're still nervous. Good reporters are always nervous. We'd put it all on the line, our careers, the paper's credibility. And we never forgot that when you fight the king, you've got to kill the king. But then the king did something that was so wonderful. He released a statement that said the texts were profoundly embarrassing and reflect a very difficult period in my life. Then as an added bonus, he put his family on a private jet and got the hell out of town. And finally, Jim and I looked like we might get a decent night's sleep.
Yeah, I think we did, although we were up pretty early. But still, we weren't expecting much. The stories that we had done over the years, we thought were pretty damn good stories, but they hadn't had any real impact. And we knew this was a great story, but still, was it going to hit with a thud on people's doorsteps and we would all move on like we had in the past? But I'll tell you what, the next morning, it was like a bombshell. Everybody was talking about this story. We were hearing from reporters all over who were telling us this journalism was a great lift for them during a really rough period for newspapers. That's when, yearly layoffs were becoming a regular thing in our business. So fast forward 2 months, we're summoned over with every other reporter in town to the prosecutor's office, to the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice. We don't know what to expect. We knew they'd done an independent investigation based on our story. And we go up to the top floor. It's elbow to elbow in there, just absolutely packed. And I sit down with my laptop because I got to write a story because it's breaking news. And prosecutor's standing at a podium, and she starts reading off felony after felony after felony, charging the mayor of Detroit and his chief of staff. My hands were shaking. I couldn't even type. I just couldn't believe our journalism had had this kind of impact.
So we were gratified that finally someone cared. But the mayor didn't care. He proclaimed his innocence. He told Detroiters, "I would never quit on you." And then he quit on them. His last words as mayor were delivered from the mayor's conference room. He told Detroiters and anybody listening, "You done set me up for a comeback."
Yeah, but first he had to go to jail. He pleaded guilty to 2 felonies. Got 120 days in jail. And really, that could have been the end of it.
But it turns out some other law enforcement types were paying attention. The feds had been reading our stuff all along, and they finally charged him. And when we saw the indictment, we started thinking, well, maybe somebody should charge the feds with plagiarism because they've basically taken what we wrote and put it in the indictment. But we weren't complaining.
So there was a 6-month trial, covered every day of it. And the mayor of Detroit was ultimately convicted along with some other folks. 24 counts, things like extortion, bribery, tax evasion, racketeering, and conspiracy.
For all his sins, the mayor got 28 years in prison. It's one of the longest public corruption sentences in U.S. history.
And today, Kwame Kilpatrick is maintaining he's an innocent man. But the people who read the Detroit Free Press know the truth.